Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
Superannuation. How much do you need to retire? Are you in the right fund? Would a self-managed super fund be a better option for you? And if you're in one, are you getting the most out of it? So many questions. Well, here comes some answers. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. We work hard for our money. Is it working hard for us? That's the question we should all be asking as we contribute regularly, year after year, into our superannuation funds, hoping that the accumulated money will provide comfortably for us when we stop working. Would a self-managed super fund work best for us? Or maybe we already have one. And if so, how's it working out? More than 25% of all super is now held in self-managed super funds. That's a lot of savings. So it's pretty clear that many people have opted for an SMSF. To help you weigh up the benefits, costs, compliance issues, and not forgetting the personal effort involved, we turn to two leading superannuation experts. Michael Jones is Superannuation and Business Advisory Partner at Mazars, and he's joined by Mazars Superannuation Partner, Clive Todd. They're talking with Nick Schilberger, who asks Michael Jones first for his perspective.
From my perspective, we're a big fan of self-managed super funds, and we have often on this program talked about their benefits. Today, though, what I'd like to do is just say, hang on, slow down. Let's just have a look at what are the obligations and all those other issues before you jump in. It's certainly true that self-managed super funds are a remarkable Australian invention, but it's also true that they're not for everybody. The number one reason I think that people want a self-managed super fund is because they want more control over their superannuation investment strategies. And that's a good starting point, because here at Mazars, we really encourage people to be engaged with their superannuation. It's important. It's a lifelong effort to have autonomy after ceasing work. And a self-managed super fund will definitely give you more control and more options. But if a self-managed super fund isn't right for you, then having more control is like, too much rope. And it's not necessarily a positive factor, and everything just might end up in tears. So what we really want to do initially is to be satisfied that having a self-managed super fund is in our client's best interest, or in fact whether some of the alternatives in superannuation are more appropriate. So often when Clive and I are discussing these sort of factors, we group it into three sort of categories. The first one, it's about the cost and the personal effort with self-managed super funds. The second category is around the compliance risk and the obligations and the responsibility with self-managed super funds. And the third one is really about your whole investment plan and your strategy and whether that plan and strategy is realistic and appropriate.
Okay, so let's pick up that first one, and perhaps, Clive, we could talk about the cost and personal effort of having a self-managed super fund.
Yeah, thanks. The costs are a big factor in a self-managed super fund, and I think when you've got your superannuation in industry or retail funds, it's a bit of a passive cost in there and you don't really necessarily notice, but when you've got a self-managed super fund, you're physically paying the payments, you're paying the fees, so you know what it's costing you. There's no sort of one-size-fits-all when it comes to self-managed super funds. They can be quite varied. But initially, you're going to have around about $2,000 to set up a self-managed super fund, which will include a corporate trustee and relevant ATO registrations, everything you need. But in addition to that, self-managed super funds are seen as a financial product. So you are likely to need financial advice around setting one up and receive a statement of advice to do so. Now, people often go, well, that's just an extra cost in doing this. I think that's got to be taken away from it a bit and go, there's actually a benefit in receiving that advice. You know what you're going into then, you know what you actually are having your superannuation invested in and why you're doing it and all what comes with that. On an ongoing basis, you then have accounting costs, you have compliance costs, you need a tax return, financial statements each year, and an annual audit. Now, the cost for the accounting can be a few $1,000s, right up from there. It depends on the complexity and what's actually involved in your fund. Audit costs, again, can be $450, $500, but also go up as well. Now, they're just the accounting side of it. You could stop there, but often you're going to be having other advisor fees, brokerage costs, any other sort of investment expenses that you may incur along the way. If you're in property, then you obviously have all the property costs that go with it. So there is a lot of costs, and you do sort of realise as you're going, but just like any other sort of investing. With an SMSF, the costs are fairly static. They aren't going to increase exponentially proportionally with what your investments are. So if your balance is going up, the costs aren't necessarily going to go up. It's mainly going to be linked around what you're doing. So there can be some real economies of scale when your balances start to grow, and even more so when you get more than one member. That's when people are pooling all their superannuation monies together. Again, that can bring the effective costs down. Now, you can have up to 4 members in a self-managed super fund, and at the moment, the legislation is in the process of going through to raise that to 6 members. So suddenly, super funds can get a lot bigger, and those costs can potentially even out a bit.
You know, Clive, it's interesting with costs. Going back a couple of years, ASIC came out with various pronouncements of how much you need before you start a self-managed superannuation fund. And it's a bit of a guideline, but it's not the only factor, is it? So I think they were coming out like with $500,000 you need or something like that. But really with costs, it depends what your plan is. And you might have less than that, but it's still worth you to start a self-managed super fund if your plan is to build on that with ongoing superannuation contributions and things. So it's hard to value the relevance of a self-managed super fund just on costs and just on how many assets you have. It's more of a long-term thing, isn't it?
Exactly right. And I think, again, that's where that benefit of that advice initially comes into its own, in that you then know what your plan is moving forward. You might be starting off with a certain amount, but with your contributions, with your investing, and obviously members coming in, then you know where you're going to with that advice up front.
You talked about the monetary side of things, but what about the personal effort?
Yeah, that's true, because there is more personal effort with a self-managed super fund. There is a commitment to manage that fund and to understand the legal structures. Sometimes I hear this overemphasised, and I don't want to overemphasise it, but the fact is it is there. And you have to be prepared to act as the trustee for your super fund. I mean, if you're in a public fund, paid professionals are looking after you. Now, if you're in a self-managed super fund, you are the trustee. The members are the trustee. So that means that you have great control, but you have responsibility as well. And for some people, perhaps a simple super solution is more appropriate. It depends also like how much experience you have with financial management. But I don't think you have to do everything yourself. And you don't have to be a financial whiz. You just have to be prepared to engage with the decisions that need to be made, to access resources that are available and seek advice when appropriate.
What about responsibility to the ATO for compliance?
Yeah, well, that's true. Like, as the trustee, you are responsible for the compliance, and parts of super law are quite complex. And fines and penalties can be imposed for getting it wrong. So, yes, it's emphasising that responsibility. There is a compliance burden. And you have to understand the fundamentals. For example, if you're the trustee of your super fund, you've got control of your bank account, which means you can make mistakes and do the wrong things. And so, you've got to be aware of the restrictions. Look, if you make a mistake, you can fix it up, but you've got to be aware and run it properly. But there's a lot of support, for self-managed super fund from the Australian Tax Office, from firms, from other bodies, but the member has to be engaged. What do you think, Clive?
Yeah, well, I agree with all that. And the fact that you might be able to, and you should be using a professional to assist you with your self-managed super fund, doesn't mean that you've actually outsourced the responsibility for what's being done in that fund. So it still lies with the trustees and all trustees. I think another important thing that we see a bit is one trustee tends to take ongoing responsibility for the fund of the day-to-day admin, investing, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, every trustee is jointly responsible and should be across what's going on in the fund. They need to be, and they're signing off on that.
Now let's discuss investments and self-managed super funds.
Okay, well, it's important to understand that there are restrictions on what a superannuation can invest in. And even though there's a wide range of investments a self-managed super fund can do, there still are restrictions. One of the things that people really like self-managed super funds for is that they can invest directly in basically real estate, which you can't get that with a public fund. But again, there are restrictions. For example, a super fund has to operate for the sole purpose of building retirement benefits for its members. And so if a self-managed super fund was to go and buy a holiday house for the members to use, it's a cross-purpose. It doesn't satisfy the sole purpose of a self-managed super fund, and you can't do it. And those contraventions of a sole purpose test are taken quite seriously. But on the other hand, what a self-managed super fund can do is acquire a commercial property that can be used in a related business. There are other things that you can do, and that sort of structure in the right circumstances where you have arm's length relationships between all the parties can be very beneficial. Also, a self-managed super fund can borrow. Again, special rules apply, and there is a risk and there's a responsibility of how you manage it, but in the right circumstances, it can be very appropriate. So, Clive, what were your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, well, again, around the investments is where it can get really exciting inside a self-managed super fund. There is properties, one that, as Michael says, is only available via a self-managed super fund, but you can also get into a lot of other unlisted alternative investments that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. So, again, advice is important. Super funds can't necessarily invest in everything, but again, there's a lot that they can. So it's an exciting way to use your superannuation retirement benefits.
Well, to sum it all up then, what are the key takeaways when considering a self-managed super fund?
Yeah, well, I think we talked a lot today about the costs and the personal effort that's involved, and also the compliance risk and responsibility. But like I say, they aren't all about the hassle and the cost. I think there's a lot of attraction in having a self-managed super fund. In addition to the investments that you could be going into, there's a lot of flexibility. You have the control factor, and there's also strategies that we won't be touching on today, but strategies that you can't do anywhere else except via a self-managed super fund that can really give you that boost to your retirement savings, which when you do get to the point where you're no longer earning any income from employment, you want as much as you can. So Michael's probably got a few more thoughts around that.
Well, really, in summary, we encourage people to be engaged with their superannuation savings. It's an important and lifelong project that ultimately will boost your autonomy. So it's a great project, and engage in it either one way or the other. And maybe a self-managed super fund is relevant for you. And that's where you really need to have an in-depth conversation about super with your advisor and just really craft the superannuation savings program that's right for you.
That was Michael Jones and Clive Todd, both partners in superannuation with Mazars. Lucky for us, and just one of the benefits of Mazars sponsorship, at times like this we can draw on their excellent expertise. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel.